Welcome to this webinar covering placement and retention services. My name is Evie Wold, and I work with placement services here at Vocational Rehabilitation Services. The training objectives for this webinar are to be able to define placement and retention services, understand the importance of pre-job search activities, know the key components of a job search, and to understand the conditions for a successful closure from placement and retention services. The information we are reviewing with you today can be found in Chapter 4G of our guidance materials. If you haven't already done so, please pause this webinar and print the forms and visuals that accompany the slides. These forms and visuals are also located on SharePoint. You can find them by clicking on Counseling and Placement Resources and then clicking on Placement. We'll be referencing the placement and retention visual often, so please keep this visual handy. Before we go into the placement process, let's take a broad look at what placement services and retention services look like. Chapter 4G contains a list of potential placement services that may be provided to an individual to assist them with their job search. Keep in mind that all services are tailored to meet the needs of each individual. Placement professionals will be identifying and developing job opportunities with the job seeker. They may be researching the labor market, contacting employers, showing resources like career force classes, Minnesota Works, or job boards, assisting with creating and updating resumes. This is often an ongoing process, tailoring the resume to fit the job. Completing employment applications, paper and online, as we know this can be very challenging. Preparing for job interviews, possibly going over sample questions, mock interviews, and informational interviews. Completing cover and thank you letters. You may be discussing the importance with the job seeker or creating templates for them to use. Providing on-site job analysis. We want to make sure the job is a good match, the position and the environment, and determine any needed accommodations or supports. Working with employers to identify and eliminate barriers. We may suggest modifications and or supports and address structural or attitudinal barriers. Keep in mind, placement services are not limited to this list. Retention services are those services provided to assist the individual with their adjustment to employment. This is an important time in the placement process. Sometimes retention services can require as much or more time and effort than placement services to ensure a successful employment outcome. As the individual gets acclimated to their new position, retention services continue. Placement professionals continue to identify and coordinate the services needed to maximize the person's skill development and assist the individual in maintaining or advancing in their employment. Retention services are very individualized based on the person's unique rehabilitation needs. The beginning of the placement and retention services process consists of pre-job search activities. You'll find the pre-job search activities on the visual shown here. These are activities the VRS counselor and the job seeker should review and discuss prior to placement services beginning. Let's take a closer look at these activities. We want to emphasize the placement team approach. As a reminder, the counselor is the facilitator of the team, and all the team members have roles and expectations. In addition to the core team, other team members may include family, social worker, independent living staff, other VRS staff, and possibly others. Some areas to discuss include informed choice. If possible, encourage the job seeker to visit or interview a variety of placement professionals. For information on criminal history and background checks, there is important information in the assessment of VR needs and employment guidance materials in Chapter 2. Another helpful item is a list of occupations that by law require a criminal background check and is found on SharePoint in Counseling Placement Resources and then in the ex-offender section. Depending on the job goal, a job seeker's credit history may be important to review. The Federal Trade Commission website contains helpful information on how a credit history can affect employment outcomes. There's a link to the Federal Trade Commission's website on SharePoint under Counseling and Placement Resources under placement titled Background Checks FTC. These are more items the counselor and the job seeker will review and discuss in preparation for the invitation to placement and throughout the placement and retention services. We'll want to continually meet the individual where they are at in the process. For example, when discussing transportation, think about more than getting to and from work, as some job goals have specific transportation requirements in place. For example, a car detailer or mechanic may be required to have a driver's license. When, if, and how to disclose a disability to a potential employer is an important topic to discuss prior to job search. This is an area that will likely need ongoing review and discussion as an individual participates in job placement and retention services. All job seekers should have their employment authorization documents available and safely stored, as the employer will need these items when they accept a job offer. The USCIS details which documents are needed for employment. Typically, a Social Security card and a driver's license or state ID are what most people use, but the bullet can be found on the USCIS website. A best practice is to ask the job seeker to bring their documents in so you can ensure they're good to go before they begin placement services. We are not allowed to make a copy of the documents, but viewing them will ensure they are appropriate to begin work. After viewing the documents, counselors should case note this in Workforce 1. For guidance on which documents are appropriate, see Chapter 4G Guidance Materials for a link to the USCIS. There are also items that are continuously reviewed and discussed throughout the placement process. You will see these services in the ribbon under the box on the visual aid. Disability disclosure, supported employment, IL services, benefits services, job coaching, and reasonable accommodation should be considered before the placement services begin and also throughout the entire placement and retention services process. Now it's the time to prepare for the placement professional to join the team. The first item to complete is the invitation to placement team. Let's take a look at this form. This is used to invite the placement professional to join the team. You will notice a section on the front highlighting the required components. Let me just pull this down. And required if complete. Remember, we're not sending copies of the I-9 information, but checking complete that we have verified that they have the appropriate employment documents. The assessment of VR needs is also included with the invitation to placement. This is completed by the counselor and is a narrative representation of the job seeker's unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and interests. VR placement coordinators can find the VR assessment of needs in Workforce 1. Counselors should print the VR assessment of needs if using a CRP, as they typically will not have access to Workforce 1. The VRS counselor will also send a completed sample employment application along with the invitation. Please refer to the sample employment application you printed for this webinar. Let's take a look at that. This is a generic job application that is prepared to assist with placement services and the development of a resume. In completing the sample application, counselors often get to know more about the job seekers by learning about their strengths, abilities, work history, challenges, and support needed. By completing this prior to the placement professional getting involved, it can help speed the placement process. The job seekers should complete as much as possible independently or with a family or support person. VR techs also often assist in the completion of the sample employment application. It is preferred that these three documents, the assessment of VR needs, the completed sample employment application, and the invitation to placement team will be given to the placement professional at the same time, and we want them to get the information in advance so they can review it and complete any of the necessary paperwork they can ahead of time. We want to make it a positive experience for the job seeker, and we want to avoid having a placement professional asking them questions they already answered for the counselor. There is an exception to this if the job seeker is involved with an agency-approved project, such as Individual Placement and Support, or IPS, when many of the pre-job search activities are completed jointly with the VRS counselor, the placement provider, and likely the mental health provider. No invitation to placement team form is completed with IPS. The IPS placement person uses their time getting to know the job seeker, as the process involves such rapid engagement. In addition to IPS, if the job seeker is in customized employment and completing a discovery assessment, the placement professional and the counselor should consult to ensure the pre-job search activities are addressed and documented either in the customized employment plan or in case notes. Let's look at the job search key components that begin with the signed placement plan meeting, which is the first milestone and is a PBA payment milestone. During this meeting, the team will complete the VRS placement plan. The placement professional is responsible for ensuring the plan is agreed upon. Let's take a look at the VRS placement plan. The VRS placement plan is a template for identifying the responsibilities of each of the core team members, the job seeker, the placement professional, and the VRS counselor. These responsibilities should be identified and agreed upon by the team during the placement plan meeting. There are two ways to complete the plan, either with a paper version or on Workforce One directly. For a paper version, you can print the plan from SharePoint and enter the plan into Workforce One following the meeting. You will also need to scan the document into EDS. If you complete the form on Workforce One, you can print the plan for signature and scan that into EDS. Only select the applicable roles and responsibilities on the form, not need to be checked. This should be individualized depending on the job seeker. Many community partners have their own placement plan form, yet only one placement plan form is needed, as it all goes back to the experience of the job seeker and making things as easy as possible. If the community partner uses their own placement plan form, the VRS counselor, as facilitator of the team approach, should ensure their roles and responsibilities are identified. A few community partners have asked if they can use our plan and add some items to it for their needs, and we're very willing to provide them a Word document of our plan for editing. Everyone gets a signed copy of the plan. It's important to consider the meeting's intent and purpose. It's the first meeting with all the core team members, the job seeker, the placement professional, and the counselor. The meeting is to establish rapport with the job seeker for meaningful discussion and sharing ideas regarding their job search. It is about the job seeker and what all of us need to do as a team to help them achieve success. Try to focus on creating a positive experience. The meeting shouldn't be about completing all of our required forms in our paperwork, other than their placement plan and possibly a release of information. It's an expectation of the placement team approach that the placement professional will complete any of the necessary paperwork ahead of time, so the meeting focus will truly be about the job seeker and their needs. During the placement plan meeting, the 60-day meeting is scheduled, and we'll discuss the 60-day meeting in a little while. The summary report is an important and required document from the placement professional and should be in the record of service prior to approving payment for the first PBA milestone. Let's take a look at the summary report form that can assist you. The counselor may also write their own case note, but the primary responsibility for summarizing this meeting falls on the placement professional. The summary report should reflect the names, titles, and agency of all who attended and their input at the meeting. It should capture the discussion and decisions that came from the meeting. And it will have the date of the first 60-day check-in meeting that everyone has agreed to, and will also indicate when the job seeker and the placement professional are meeting for the first time to continue working together on a job search. Following their placement plan meeting, all placement professionals will attempt at least weekly communication with the job seeker and explain weekly assignments that the job seeker and the placement professional will each complete. We realize situations may occur where a job seeker or placement professional is not able to meet each week as scheduled, but attempts should be made. Twice monthly written communications are required and continue throughout the entire placement and retention process. This is a minimum level of communications and are not meant to replace additional phone calls or other types of communication that should certainly occur. Let's take a look at the communication update form. This form can be used to document the communication, or a Workforce One case note containing the same information should be completed. If you're utilizing the communication update, scan it in the EDS and make a case note indicating this was completed. Community partner placement professionals can use the communication update form or email their case notes with the same information. Once the job seeker and placement professional begin working together, a resume should be developed, given to the job seeker, and entered into EDS. The sample employment application is usually a great help in completing the job seeker's resume. Communication updates are helpful to address any issues that present themselves, prepare for the 60-day check-in meetings ahead of time, encourage the job seeker and placement professional, as placement is hard work. Make sure you're on the right track, and if not, reassess, re-clarify roles as needed, more timely coordination of efforts. Some strategies that have worked for counselors to ensure you're receiving the twice monthly communication updates are to utilize Workforce One ticklers, to discuss the importance of the signed placement plan meeting to discuss the importance of the communication updates at the signed placement plan meeting and at each 60-day check-in meeting. Some VRS have created a spreadsheet to track communication updates coming in, and you may consult with your RAM to assist in working more effectively with the community partner. The next step in the process is the 60-day check-in. The 60-day check-in is a recurring meeting until the job seeker obtains employment. The goal of the 60-day check-in is to reassess the job goal and supports needed, discuss any barriers that have arisen, assess complete understanding of the job goal, encourage and support the job seeker and the placement coordinator, and brainstorm together. Now we're at the point where job seeker has obtained a job offer. Time to celebrate. There are many important things to consider at this point. It's the responsibility of the placement professional to contact the counselor when the job offer has been received and discuss any needed supports like job coaching, accommodations, assistive technology, or uniform needs. Address any new discoveries regarding the job seeker's background and barriers to successful employment. Some examples might be changes in previously arranged childcare, transportation, or new duties on the job that were not anticipated. Consider meeting with the job seeker to assist with preparation for the first day of work. This can be helpful for the individual, especially if they're anxious about starting work. You may discuss any questions they may have or assist in completing any paperwork for their new job. Communicate with the employer as appropriate and convey the findings to the VRS counselor as necessary. And ensure the individual understands their responsibility to report their earnings to Social Security or other government benefit programs. It's the responsibility of the counselor at this point to identify other needed services for successful employment, to ensure the resources and supports are arranged in advance of the first day of work, to introduce the job coach or a follow-up person to the job seeker if the service is needed for the first day of work, to address any new discoveries regarding the job seeker's background and barriers to successful employment, and to ensure the individual understands their responsibility to report their earnings to Social Security. The first shift of employment is the second placement milestone and is a payment milestone under a PBA. At this time, it's important for the placement professional to contact VRS counselor as soon as possible with information regarding the job. RSA recently audited our placement process, and there's some extra requirements for reporting new employment. RSA is now requiring us to collect and document the job seeker's wages, job title, hours, start date, and level of benefits. We also must document who provided and obtained the information on the date it was verified. We can get the information from the job seeker or the employer. We just need to document who it was received from and the date. There are new fields in Workforce One that are now being developed to capture this information. There was recently a Minnesota law enacted requiring employers to give offer letters to every new employee. This was part of the Minnesota wage theft law and went into effect on July 1st, 2019. This offer letter would be a great way to collect the employment information needed by RSA. Let's look at the communication update form again that we looked at in some previous slides. The communication update form has a section on the second page covering the required information needed upon job hire, and this has been updated to include all the new information that RSA is requiring us to collect. Underneath that section, you'll also see another new section for a closure. We'll go over the closure verifications later in the webinar. All the employment information should be entered into Workforce One, and the VRS placement coordinators will enter their own. Community partners will submit a communication update form or an email with information and invoice, and the counselor will need to update the employment information on Workforce One. For post-job start support, the level of support must fit with the individual's needs to help them achieve success. For many of the individuals we work with, they will require more than the minimum level of follow-up. This follow-up provides the opportunity to identify and discuss any additional concerns or job supports needed for a successful employment outcome. Let's take a look now at the job coaching report. This should be used to document job coaching hours. 20 hours of job coaching are included within a PBA. If additional hours are needed, the placement professional should consult with the counselor. Job coaching reports are required whether within a PBA or when additional job coaching hours have been approved and authorized. Placement professional or the job coach must provide follow-up at least every other week, and twice monthly communication updates continue until placement and retention services are closed. Please keep in mind that retention services, which includes follow-up, are an important component of the process and should not be neglected. When the job seeker's been on the job 30 days, there's a check-in by the VRS counselor. You can see here where this step falls in the placement process. At this point in the process, the counselor makes at least one check-in with the individual following the first 30 days of work. This check-in should be documented in Workforce One. This is an important step in the process and helps maintain the connection with the consumer. It also helps to ensure that the individual has the supports they need in place to be successful in their employment. The final step in the placement process is a successful placement closure. This is PBA milestone 3 and is a payment milestone. For a successful placement closure, we need to ensure that the job is consistent with the goals and services outlined in the employment plan. The individual and the counselor agree that the employment is satisfactory and the individual is performing well on the job. They must be paid at or above the federal, state, or local minimum wage, whichever is highest. and be paid at or above the customary rate and be eligible for the same level of benefits as persons without disabilities doing similar work and with comparable training skills and experiences with that employer. The individual has made substantial progress toward consistently working the number of hours per week established in the placement plan, and the work is performed in a competitive, integrated employment setting. Any ongoing supports should be adequate to meet the individual's need with respect to retaining employment. The 90 days of employment began after any VRS paid training services, such as on-the-job training and job coaching, have been completed. The 90 days of employment must be with the same employer and the same position unless the individual has made the informed decision for successive temporary employment assignments. The first part of that condition relates to starting the 90-day clock over when an individual accepts a different position within the same company or has the same position for two different companies during the 90 days. For example, the 90-day clock starts over when someone working at Target as a courtesy clerk receives a promotion to a cashier. 90 days starts over with the first day of the cashier because they're on new duties and likely a new supervisor. Likewise, if a person accepts a similar position with another company, for example, a person's working as a CNA for a nursing home and leaves that employer for another CNA job with a different company, the 90-day clock will begin again with the new employer. Successive temporary assignments is in reference to situations such as seasonal work or accepting different temporary assignments from a staffing agency, and the individual makes an informed choice that this meets their needs. For supported employment situations, follow-up services have been provided for a minimum of 90 days after the individual has attained employment stability on the job and has made the transition to extended ongoing supports. For more information on supported employment and employment stability, see supported employment guidance materials. The VRS record of service does not have to be closed before the community partner can receive the final PPA milestone payment, as VRS may still be involved in providing other services to the individual. For a successful closure from placement and retention services, the placement professional provides the VRS counselor with a summary of the successful placement. All the employment detail requirements are listed on the communication update, including the employer's name, address, wage, job title, hours, start date, level of benefits, who obtained the information, and who the information was obtained from, and the date. This information is entered into Workforce One by VRS placement professionals, and community partners provide the placement closure summary details using either the communication update form or an email with the same information, along with an invoice for the final milestone payment. There's a tool titled Placement and Retention Services Closure Summary Case Note Conditions. This is a tool developed to assist the placement professionals in writing their summary case note when the placement and retention services file is closed. A successful placement involves a lot of time and effort. Take credit for all the work you do and the services you provide. We know that not all items will apply to every placement and retention services closure, but it gives an idea of potential placement and retention services. VR placement professionals and counselors will be documenting the entire placement and retention services process into Workforce One. When entering case notes, there are multiple choices for case note subject categories. Your category choices are simply meant to be a caseload management tool for you. On the right is a list of case note categories that correspond with events during the placement and retention process. When you pull up the list of categories, you will find them in alphabetical order. This concludes the placement and retention services process. Please reach out to one of your friendly placement specialists if you have questions or need help. Thank you for viewing this webinar.